Super Eagles lose African Cup of Nations semi-finals as well as bid for a fourth African title.
Nigeria Police Service Commission promises transparency in ongoing nationwide recruitment.
We have the approval of Mr. President to recruit 10,000 rank and file for the force.
House leader expresses optimism over President Muhammadu Buhari's ability to address challenges confronting the country.
Nigerians will get quality education. Nigerians will get infrastructural facilities that will enhance our economic development.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss financing options for infrastructural development.
Now, many countries of the world resort to external borrowing to fund infrastructure and other developmental deficit.
Of course, Rhoda, that's very true. The United States of America, for instance, which is ranked amongst the richest countries of the world, currently has a debt profile of $22 trillion, largely, of course, being domestic debts for purposes of booming its economy.
And talking about debt profile, that of Nigeria was in the news recently, and precisely, Kingsley, that was last week, and is said to have risen to 24.9 trillion naira as at March 31st, 2019, and that is as compared to 24.3 trillion naira in December last year, and that's according to the DMO, Nigeria's Debt Management Office.
Well, Rhoda, that's an increase of 2.3% within the period, which the Debt Management Office attributed to the rise in domestic debt by more than 450 billion naira.
Now, external debt equally increased by more than 100 billion naira during the same period. But the DMO was quick to note that Nigeria's total debt to GDP ratio is 19.3%, which is still within the 25% debt limit imposed by the government.
That's right, Rhoda, and also under the usual global debt to GDP ceiling of 30%. Well, the country's economic and financial managers have explained at various fora that Nigeria's external borrowing is from cheaper sources and mainly to finance public infrastructure, with the aim of accelerating economic growth and wealth creation.
And talking about economic growth, Kingsley, we're looking at the fact that there has been a very, very significant increase in financing of capital projects under this administration. That's the President Buhari's administration, with ripple economic effects.
But that's right. One question to ask is that the only way to go? What are the other options for growing Nigeria's infrastructure? And what is the economic implication of Nigeria's current debt profile? And what are the positives of our borrowing plan?
So many questions, Kingsley, and that's what we intend to, get answers to on the program this morning as we discuss financing options for infrastructural development, and we shall raise them with all the guests that we will be having on the program this morning. It's our pleasure again, and we say thank you for joining us on this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. We are broadcasting live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority from Nigeria's capital city, Abuja. I'm Rhoda Anonem. Thank you for joining us. Kingsley, by the way, good morning. And Nigeria lost yesterday.
Yeah,
sad one.
Unfortunately.
Very unfortunately.
Yes, that's what stuff happens, as the saying goes, but better luck next time.
Serena Williams lost
on Saturday as well. Bad news. It was shocking. But
really shocking.
Again, she still has her 23 Grand Slams, so looking for a record equaling 24th. The tension gets to her from time to time. But the fact that she has reached the finals of 3 Grand Slam tournaments, Wimbledon last year, US Open last year, and again Wimbledon this year, shows that she's still one of the players to be feared on the tour. She just needs more tournaments to be able to boost her skills. But of course, last night we also saw the longest men's singles final in history, just 3 minutes shy of 5 hours. You had Roger Federer, who has 20 Grand Slams, taking on Novak Djokovic, who is world number 1. And it's, of course, Novak Djokovic, who leads Roger Federer on all other indices, except for number of Grand Slams and total number of titles, overcame Roger Federer in 5 sets, 5 grueling sets. Congratulations to Novak Djokovic. My name is Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Rhoda to also welcome you to today's edition of the program, in the course of which we shall have regular complimentary segments. And these, of course, include newspaper review, business, and others. In the meantime, let's have highlights of the morning news. And here is Nolene Ebelame as our anchor. Hello, Nolene. Hello,
Kingsley. Good morning. Good morning, Nigeria. And here is the early morning news. The Super Eagles' hope of a fourth title at the African Cup of Nations was dashed last night as they lost their AFCON semi-final 2-1 to hard-fighting Algeria at the nick of regulation time. The Super Eagles are now built to face Tunisia, which lost its semi-final to Senegal in the consolatory third-place match of the football tournament. The federal government is determined to speed up the completion of the second Niger Bridge before the finished date of 2022. Federal Comptroller of Works, Anambra State, Adeyomo Ajani, said this during the visit of a team of engineers from Abuja to the site.
We have done all the piling across the river, from axis 100 to the end. We have equally raised the structure above the water level to a large extent, only remaining 2 pile caps to be done in the river. In fact, from the progress so far now, I think we are comfortable.
All the concerns we have from my colleagues, they are all positives. We are satisfied because all the places that need to be sources of worry, the contractor, the supervisory team, and the consultants, tidied up the ends.
The federal government says it will no longer tolerate incessant threats to life and property in border communities across the country. Nigerian ambassador to Benin Republic, Kayode Oguntuashe, made this known while on a fact-finding mission to oil-rich Tungeji Island in Ogun State, where the community has been grappling with constant threats of invasion from neighboring Benin Republic.
Give the community the assurance of the federal government of Nigeria, particularly our President Muhammadu Buhari, that this community, the safety of the community, safety of the territory, safety of the people, we want to ensure that it is guaranteed.
For agriculture to regain its position as Nigeria's major income earner, farmers' efforts must be backed by the political will needed to achieve the desired objectives. The agricultural policy of the Buhari administration is believed to be helping farmers in the Northeast access capital-intensive farming inputs.
Whether it is a loan or not, they should comply with the rules and regulations laid down by NECAS so that others can benefit, so that more of it can come. If you are having 150 tractors today and you comply, I can assure that you get 300, eventually 1,000.
The House of Representatives has once again expressed optimism over the ability of President Muhammadu Buhari to address challenges confronting the country and pushing a legislative agenda that will smoothen rough edges between the National Assembly and the executive so as to avoid previous mistakes. House leader Ado Alhassan Doguwa was speaking shortly after he led APC supporters from Kano South Senatorial Zone on a thank-you visit to Governor Abdullahi Umar Ganduje.
Nigerians will get quality education. Nigerians will get infrastructural facilities that will enhance our economic development. Nigerians should have confidence in the National Assembly, and they should have also confidence in the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, ably represented by Mr. President.
The Nigerian Police Service Commission says it will continue to place premium on transparency as well as physical and mental fitness of prospective candidates in the ongoing nationwide recruitment. Chairman of the Commission, Ms. Liu Smith, at an on-the-spot assessment of the exercise in Akure, the Ondo State capital, says these are part of efforts to reposition and reform the force.
We have the approval of Mr. President to recruit 10,000 rank and file for the force. It's the first time we are doing very, very intensive screening of people who want to bring into the force. It's the same standard procedure.
Nigerian pilgrims from the 2019 Hajj exercise are daily arriving the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in hundreds for the annual holy pilgrimage.
May Allah grant you a safe journey to and from the Holy Land. May Allah accept your Hajj as an act of worship. I urge you to pray for our dear country, Nigeria.
On a sad note, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has joined others to condole the leader of the Yoruba Sociocultural Group, Afenifere, Pa Ruben Fashoranti, over the death of his daughter, Mrs. Funke Olakunri. The national leader of the All Progressives Congress, Asiwaju Bola Tinubu, was also in Akure to sympathize with the nonagenarian.
We're looking at the whole security architecture and trying to ensure that we're able to upscale the architecture and ensure that we're able to protect the lives and properties of Nigerians. Security in a big country such as ours is obviously, as you can imagine, a challenge. It's dynamic, and so we have to be consistently dynamic in ensuring that we're able to meet the challenges as they appear.
Similarly, the Senate has condoled with the family of Afenifere leader Pa Ruben Fashoranti over Friday's murder of his daughter, Mrs. Funke Olakunri, along Akure Ore Road in Ondo State. A statement by the chairman, Senate Ad Hoc Committee on Media and Publicity, Adedayo Adeye, describes the gruesome murder of a 58-year-old Mrs. Olakunrin as very sad, devastating and worrisome development. While condemning the heinous and barbaric act, the Senate urges the Inspector General of Police, Muhammad Adamu, to begin massive manhunt for the perpetrators and ensure they are apprehended. That's the news for now. Good morning, Nigeria continues with Rhoda and Kingsley. Thank you for watching.
One Football Confederation, 24 teams, 6 stadiums, 4 cities, 504 African stars, 1 trophy. The Africa Cup of Nations Egypt 2019 comes alive from June 21 with the showpiece final on July 19, 2019. Watch the 52 matches of the tournament live on Africa's biggest and largest television network, NTA, in partnership with Hotsports. Be part of the biggest soccer fiesta in the African continent as the Super Eagles go on a bold mission to clinch the prestigious title for the 4th time, to the excitement of millions of fans across the length and breadth of Nigeria. Nigeria's premier sports production and marketing group, Hotsports, partners with the biggest, the largest and the #1 television network in Africa, the NTA, to give Nigerians a memorable viewing experience. Boost fan support for the Super Eagles to glory in Egypt. For inquiries, please contact Abubakar on 0803-331-0175 and Felix on 0803-308-2375. NTA, you can't beat the rich.
Corruption not in my country. We have run out of vaccines. You can return on Wednesday.
I need to get vaccinated so I can have my yellow card. That's all.
We will offer you some reparation.
Now you're talking. Yes. So you had reparation since, and you keep telling me that there's no vaccine. Doctor.
By reparation, we mean accept our sincere apology.
Hey, I hear say you won't get a yellow card. If you get 4,000, give me. I will do yellow card for you, sharp.
And give me the vaccine.
Vaccine?
Oh, okay. So you give people fake yellow card. And when they go out there without vaccinating them, so they'll start calling this country bad name. This is corruption. And I will not be part of it. Not in my country. Not in my country.
This message is from Akin Fadei Foundation with support from MacArthur Foundation.
I can taste the real chicken. Don't worry, Abba. It's not your chicken.
It's the Sedap Supreme Chicken Essence that gives it the supreme chicken taste. Be Supreme, Nigeria.
Mommy is ready to receive me a bundle of joy. Mommy is making my home cleaner and safer. We are Dettol sure. Daddy is home. He must be germ-free. He needs to be Dettol sure. My clothes are so nice. We are Dettol sure.
Illnesses can happen at home too. That's why Dettol and me together will make my baby's home safe and to protect from up to 100 illness-causing germs. That's why moms want to be Dettol sure.
We are Dettol sure.
NTA Television College Jos announces admissions into 2-year diploma programs in film and television production, television engineering, and broadcast journalism. The sale of forms will commence on the 13th of May and run through 30th July 2019. Admission forms can be obtained from all marketing offices, NTA state capital stations, zonal centers, or at the office of the academic secretary, NTA Television College, Rayfield, Jos.
On payment of a non-refundable fee of 7,500 naira in bank draft in favor of NTA TV College. Applicants can also obtain the forms through the NTA TV College portal at www.ntatvc.edu.nj.
Applicants are required to possess 5 credits in GCE or SSCE in relevant areas of study in not more than 2 sittings, including English and mathematics. All properly completed forms attached with photocopies of credentials must be submitted on or before 30th July 2019. For further inquiries, please visit our website at ntatvc.com or call 0803 3144 383.
NTA TV College, training you to be the best you want to be.
Registrar Announcer.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. Now, reactions have continued to trail the signing of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement entered into by Nigeria, as well as stakeholders are calling for stiffer monetary policy regime. Let's join Chimobi Walter, who's standing by on details on business news.
Nigeria, with an estimated $500 billion economy, joined forces with other African economies to create a strong economic power through the signing of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Some economists believe for Nigeria to achieve its desired objective in signing the agreement, moves must be made to ratify the agreement so as to improve the nation's dialoguing opportunities, to expunge clauses in the agreement that does not apply to the country, while others believe there is need for reforms in the public service sector for optimum performance.
Because as it stands, is either you become an enterprise hub or you become a dumping ground, and which you cannot afford to do. Now, obviously, you can see from the CBN, their 5-year plan. See, everybody's looking at how to industrialize. The government, since they came into government, since they came into power, have always done things towards diversifying the economy away from oil and gas. So there's this boost in agricultural production. There's so much going on when it comes to lending to the SMEs. Now, we need to do much more.
In a related development, the federal government has been admonished to look into inflationary issues and monetary policy issues before the implementation of the eco-currency regime within the ECOWAS region so as to meet up with its criteria before commencement.
The head of state did not say that the thing should start next year. So they only said that they have the name, which is ECO. That's number one. The design has actually been perfected. Then some of the convergent criteria, like targeting of inflation through monetary policy, as well as other issues that ought to be looked at, members should look at them very well so that we don't meet the target.
With Business News, I'm Chimobi Walter Naji.
All right, thank you very much, Chimobi, for the business package. Next for us now is a review of the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
As always, to give more depth and insight into our review, our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Toby, is here with us this morning. Bayo, good morning.
Thank you, Rhoda. Good morning. How was your weekend?
Awesome.
Good morning,
I
Kinsley.
hope you enjoyed
Good
your
morning,
weekend
Nigeria.
also.
I did, except that my expectation for the Super Eagles was dashed. However, we are in at least the losers' final.
You know, I just couldn't sleep. Don't know why, after the game. But Kingsley was okay.
Kingsley was
Kingsley
not
suffered
surprised.
double loss. he suffered. Serena Williams lost during the weekend also. So
Okay, double
I knew he
loss.
suffered a
No,
double loss.
but you know, before the Super Eagles played, if anybody who watched the Wimbledon final, I mean, Bayo, we're discussing that before you came, would obviously have been entertained, you know, to find two of the top three in the world, take on each other for almost 5 hours. It's the longest final in Wimbledon's men's history. So it was thrilling and you know, up and down. So that was sufficient entertainment. And of course, Novak Djokovic now has chalked up 16 Grand Slam titles and 5 years younger than Roger Federer, who is 37, by the way. And so it was quite some compensation, if you will.
The Super Eagles who can get compensation at least for the bronze. If we are able to
I hope so, because Senegal played very well against Tunisia. That was a fantastic game.
How many bronze crowns have we received, you know, from AFCON? It's quite a lot. I remember 1978, we had bronze.
Yes.
It was Ghana, that was Ghana 78. 2002 was one of the recent bronze medals we also had. So that's on and on, but I mean, bronze isn't gold, by the way.
It's better than
For
great
now,
with
have
nothing.
bread.
It's better than none.
But bronze isn't gold.
Yes.
All right, let's begin a review of today's papers. We have a couple of papers with us. We have a Daily Trust, we have the Leadership, and we have the Daily Sun. But first, let's begin with the Daily Sun. And just beside the nameplate, it says, borrowing FROC plans clamp down on debtors. States that's on page 40. That's beside the nameplate, and the lead story says insecurity. Federal government deploys soldiers in highways. Federal government deploys soldiers in highways with a couple of riders there. Community policing coming soon. Pledges Oshimbajo. Senate expresses fears, urges overhaul of security architecture. That's the lead story with the riders there. It's on page 6. And below the picture story, it's, of course, the sports story. AFCON Eagles failed to qualify, lose to Algeria, concede goal on dot of 90 minutes, meet Tunisia for bronze. That's on page 45. And below that, UK Parliament holds session on oil spillage in Bielsa and others. That's on page 41. And on page 4 and 5, you can read up, bandits ambush security agents, kill 10 in Katsina. And NASL champion restructuring, says Kalu. That's on page 12. Those are the stories trending on the front page of the Daily Sun this morning.
All right, let's take a look at the Daily Trust newspaper. Daily Trust, below the nameplates, petitions. Let's say election petitions. Justice Bukachua cancels vacation for judges. And 7 wedding guests killed in Katsina road accident. Lake Chad governors meet in Niamey. Now, the lead story for Daily Trust says soldiers abscond with GOC's millions. 2 arrested as army begins investigation. And then right at the foot of the front page, Mahrez shatters Super Eagles AFCON title hopes. That's page 63. And Reps Committee visits Bauchi over assembly crisis. That's page 15. And volume of unclaimed dividends still huge, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Details of that story on page 19. Right, let's also take a look very quickly at the front page of the Leadership newspaper. Leadership, below the nameplate, federal government and Ethiopian Airlines and others plan new national carrier. Federal government, Ethiopian Airlines and others plan new national carrier. Bajabi Amina visits Zamfara, meets bandits. That's on page 13. And also the story we read earlier from the Daily Trust is the lead for the Leadership newspaper. No annual vacation for appeal court judges. That's according to Bukachua. Justices with pressing medical issues granted 15 days, 735 petitions pending before appellate court. Lawyers and others differ over directive. Federal government probes PEF, that's Petroleum Equalization Fund, and freezes two managers' 3 billion naira account. That story has a continuation on page 4. And then right at the foot of the front page, you have the following headlines. ICPC set to monitor states' budgetary allocations. And Army refutes unmanned aerial vehicle video. That's page 6. Kogi APC Vice Chairman Asala dies at 54. Hajj, 2,089 pilgrims depart Kaduna, Kano, Kwara, and Lagos for Saudi Arabia. And Oshibajo visits Fashoronti, says federal government will deploy soldiers to highways. Page 6.
Well, let's start with the report on the annual vacation of justices of the Court of Appeal. The President Court of Appeal, Zainab Bolkachua, has appealed to justices to make sacrifices in the face of so many pending appeal cases arising from the 2019 general election. He has now restricted to possible vacation for only a period of 15 days for those who actually desire it for exigencies. The Court of Appeal spokesperson Saadatu Musa Kachala says the President Court of Appeal will allow 15 days holiday for justices with challenges. The appeals are time-bound, and therefore something has to be done within the period of July to October, which normally is the period of the vacation. Presently, a roster is to ensure that justices for every division are rearranged to accommodate the development. Presently, the election petitions are 800 as at June 17. State Assembly's petitions are about 415. The Senate has 105, House of Representatives 214, the governorship 62, and presidential 4. And all these have to be disposed of within the time bound provided by law. Also, presently, 65 petitions have been dismissed or stricken off. 735 petitions are still pending. And that is why the Court of Appeal will now have to put the vacation on hold. The other story of attention...
I'm sorry, just before you leave the story with regard to the suspension or deferment of vacation for appeal court judges who are handling election petition matters, I think it's a matter that will have to be examined in future. The way and manner election petitions are handled, under our judicial system. In other words, just our electoral jurisprudence. There's too much legalism in it in the first instance, strict legalism in the first instance. And you also now begin to ask yourself, when does a litigant in an election petition get justice? How then do you compose the tribunals to hear election petitions? Because as it were, yes, we have had reforms to say that petitions must be disposed of within time limits so that matters will not drag on, and then the judges who are involved can then dispose of those matters and then proceed, to handle other litigation or other appeals that they have to deal with. But usually, in an election cycle, the entire legal system is virtually frozen.
Yes.
Because judges are handling all of these issues. Now, election petition tribunals are not the only tribunals that we have under our legal system. We also have the IST, for instance, which is the Investment and Securities Tribunal. And then you also have the tax appeal tribunals. Just last week, the tax appeals tribunals, appeals tribunal was reviewing the number of cases that they have handled since they took off. The latest set took off in November last year. And of course, that if you listen to the quantum of cases that they have resolved and that those that will be resolved shortly, it then shows, in my opinion, that at some point, perhaps we would need, in terms of legal reform, to say, look, is it only judges who are serving that should sit on appeal tribunals? And shouldn't also the processes of procedure of election tribunals, be revised so that the strict liability, because it's very difficult for you to prove rigging in our system. Yeah.
Well, those are things for our judicial review particularly our jurisprudence and the judicial processes. As we go, we progress and we begin to make amends as we go along. But meanwhile, the other story about corruption is that community policing, that should be 500 persons have volunteered to be part of the community policing. The chairman of the Governors Forum and governor of Ekiti State revealed it that all 36 states, in fact, all the 777 74 local government of Nigeria, as well as the Federal Capital Territory, have members of the volunteers for the community policing. Every state has at least 10,000. 5 states have about 18,000 among them, including the Federal Capital Territory that also have more than 10,000. The whole idea is to ensure that the volunteers will serve in the ambit of community policing, considering the fact that the 10,000 police that has been approved to be recruited around for the whole nation cannot go around, and therefore they are considering using this instrumentality to beef up the instances of policing. The Inspector General of Police had approval to recruit 10,000, and that is being handled by the Police Service Commission. But the N-Power volunteers will fill the void that is expected. There is the concern of the Inspector General of Police, and he has sent his special forces and Ondo State Police Command to comb all the forest of Ondo State for alleged killers of Mrs. Funke Olakunrin. The deployment is to the state forests, which criminals have converted into their camps. And Mrs. Olakunrin was killed on Friday at Kajola, a village, when government ambushed her vehicle along the Shagamu Road. Some arrests are reported to have been made. The police public relations officer for Ondo State, Femi Johnson, says that the combination of the IGP Special Force and the Ondo State Police Command are on the trail of the killers, and they will not rest until the murderers are brought to book. Mrs. Olakunrin is daughter of Chief Ruben Fashorati.
All right, Bayo, let's quickly take a look at our editorial for this morning. Very quickly.
The issue about what the Vice President said after his visit to Akure, that soldiers will be deployed on the highways. Yeah. If you recall, on Good Morning Nigeria, we have had guests who have raised the issue as to the best location, to flush out bandits. It is not on the highway. The bandits are encamped in the forest and in the bushes. And that's why, those locations have to be regularly swept by the security agents. You can have them on the highway, and then they are there in their camps, which will be the staging post from time to time, wherever there is a gap between the locations of the security forces, whether military or police. They will hit and then go back, into their encampments.
Yes, indeed. Even in Katsina State, particularly in Basari local government area, the persons have also complained that they know the locations of the forest. They have availed such information to the security agencies, and they have challenged them that they are prepared to lead them to those locations so that they can flush them out. Staying on the highway still does not eliminate the problem. Like you pointed out, certainly they will come for flash attacks and get back to their routes. But if you get to the camp, then you are taking the war to their locations.
And amateur drones are available all over the place, where you can launch and then take still or video photographs, video shots of where this, process them at real time and know where these people are.
All right, let's take our editorial this morning. Our editorial this morning is on the Punch, and it's on preparing to take AFCFTA by storm. I'll just read the first paragraph bio. It says, after a prolonged period of indecisiveness, Nigeria has eventually taken the bold step to sign up to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, a step perceived as capable of redefining the economic trajectory of the continent's most dominant economy. There is no doubt that Nigeria is joining the group reluctantly, but having risen up to the bait by inking the deal more than a year after the African countries gathered in Kigali, Rwanda to sign the agreement, it is now left for the country to make the best out of it. And that's something we have discussed 1, 2, 3 times on the program, even before the signing and then the signing, how we can make very good and judicious use of this opportunity, or the CFTA?
Well, it's often said that the bigger the headache. With the 55 countries in Africa coming together for this economic bloc, it is going to be the biggest economic bloc in the world. And the implication for that is that, are we ready? And the editorial is challenging Nigeria to be prepared, because Nigeria has the potentials to take tremendous advantages from this continental free trade. And the editorial is pointing out that we have to look inwards and look at the areas that we are strong, and so that we'll be able to compete. However, we need to look inwards and look at our manufacturing. 40% of manufacturing depend on electricity, and we have challenges with our electricity. They are also drawing attention to our infrastructure, rail and roads, particularly roads, for which there's a lot of effort to improve on them now. And the editorial is also challenging us that in terms of security, banditry, militants, terrorists, kidnappers, and smugglers are still a tremendous threat to this continental free trade. And therefore, Nigeria, if you take advantage of it, must make sure that these internal impetuses are put right. Nigeria must identify its area of advantage. And the editorial points out we have large mass of arable land, and therefore that is potential for mechanized agriculture. And processing materials also should be considered so as to provide for added value rather than exporting agricultural product in raw form. And the emphasis particularly of the editorial is that if Nigeria must take full advantage of it, then we must improve and increase our small and medium scale industries, because World Economic Forum says that 80% of employment are created through that avenue.
Bayo, thanks a lot for being around.
Thank you too.
I'm sure tomorrow will be a much brighter visage. All right, no problem. Stuff happens, as I say.
Sports like that, we win some,
lose some. That's right. So, no problem. We'll hope for the very best in other tournaments. Bayo, thank you for being here. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria, still on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll get ahead with our principal item for discussion this morning.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
One football confederation, 24 teams, 6 stadiums, 4 cities, 504 African stars, 1 trophy. The Africa Cup of Nations Egypt 2019 comes alive from June 21 with the showpiece final on July 19, 2019. Watch the 52 matches of the tournament live on Africa's biggest and largest television network, NTA, in partnership with Hot Sports. Be part of the biggest soccer fiesta in the African continent as the Super Eagles go on a bold mission to clinch the prestigious title for the 4th time, to the excitement of millions of fans across the length and breadth of Nigeria. For inquiries, please contact Abubakar on 0803-331-0175 and Felix on 0803-308-2375. NTA, you can't beat the rich.
I can taste the real chicken. Real chicken.
Don't worry, Abba. It's not your chicken.
It's the Sedap Supreme Chicken Essence that gives it the supreme chicken taste. Be Supreme, Nigeria.
Sensitivity is a short, sharp pain that people experience when they have something hot or cold getting to the nerve of the tooth. If the sensitivity is left alone, it may get worse. Dentists recommend Sensodyne. It's able to calm the nerve of the tooth. The proof's in the results. It works.
All right, you're welcome back. And if you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on Africa's largest television network, the NTA. Our focus this morning is financing options for infrastructure development. We have our guests seated here in the studio. But first, to lay the foundation for our discussion, here is a background report put together by Oyeyemi Ajayi.
Provision of infrastructure is key to the growth and development of the country, which is why annual budgets are tailored towards growing critical infrastructure. However, funding infrastructure is capital intensive and quite challenging for developing countries, including Nigeria. Little wonder many governments resort to borrowing to grow their infrastructure, which attendant effects on debt profile. Though some economic analysts would question borrowing to fund infrastructural projects, others would argue that borrowing from relatively cheap sources with favorable debt servicing plan is not a bad idea. Recent increase in Nigeria's debt profile has been attributed largely to rise in domestic and external debts to fund specific capital projects, especially in the transportation sector. The country's Debt Management Office (DMO) says a ratio of domestic to external debts stood at 68.49% to 31.51% at the end of March 2019. With the challenges of debt servicing, different sources of funding critical infrastructure, such as the Public-Private Partnership Model (PPP), foreign direct investments, bonds, and even taxation are being thrown up by experts as alternatives of borrowing. What are the benefits of borrowing to fund infrastructure? And are there other financing options available? Guest on NTA's Good Morning Nigeria will provide answers shortly.
All right, thank you very much, Oyeyemi Ajayi, for that background. That we have guests with us in the studios as well as at our network centers to discuss this. First, two of them here with us, familiar faces on Good Morning Nigeria. Let's welcome Professor Uche Waleke. He's a professor of capital market at Nasarawa State University and also President, Association of Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Professor Waleke, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Kinsley.
All right, another familiar face on Good Morning Nigeria, Niyi Akinsiju. Niyi Akinsiju, of course, is an investment analyst. Morning and welcome to the program.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure.
Okay. You will tell us how much was lost on account of Nigeria crashing out of the Cup of Nations, the semi-finals and that. Okay.
All right, from our Kaduna studios, we have Dr. Mohammed Sani Bello. He's a senior lecturer at the Kaduna State University and former commissioner for Science and Technology, Kaduna State. Welcome to the program. And from our Lagos Network Center, we're being joined by Chinedu Anozia. He is a financial consultant. All right, gentlemen, let's begin our discussion this morning. But very briefly, we're looking at financing options for infrastructural development. But very briefly, let's take a look at our debt profile. How does it stand right now? There was a statistics, or would I say, that came out last week. How is it right now?
Yeah, thanks very much. If you define debt, public debt, as the totality of government obligations, then we are looking at a figure that is huge, perhaps bigger than the 24.9 trillion naira figure that we have. Because if you add contractor debts, pensioners, judgment debts, and even the one by AMCOM is owing about 5 trillion. If you add all of that, then you have a huge figure. So the quantum is really huge. But back to the one that's even published by the DMO, published on July 10, the total stock of the debt, both domestic and foreign, amounts to 24.9. That's about $81 billion. And if you look at it in terms of our GDP, if you take GDP of, say, 410 and you place $81 billion on 410, you get around 19%. So that may not seem, a problem on the basis of, GDP. Even though we know that if you now look at it on the basis of debt service, you get a challenge. Of course, a number of factors have led to the debt situation that we have. The first, you will recall, happens to be the commodity price shock. The fall in the fuel price, led to fall in revenue, and the government needed to borrow. And associated with that also, has to do with the high exchange rate, the depreciation of the naira. So depreciation of the naira, increase in the development funding, because over time government has increased, if you notice, increased spending on capital projects, have all combined to bring about that, and which is why I think that in terms of development, for me, there doesn't seem to be a better option, financing infrastructure, outside of borrowing, because we can't afford to print money. If you look at the other options, we can't afford to print money.
Yeah.
We can also not afford to raise taxes at this point in time. Okay, so what would seem feasible for now is, going to borrow. But of course, the question for me is, whether what we have done so far, have been optimal in terms of where we have borrowed. But the concerns are genuine. Concerns are genuine because it's not just the size of the debt stock, but more importantly, is the fact that we are spending so much servicing the debts. I want to give an example quickly. If you look at the FAC distribution released by MBS, National Bureau of Statistics, it says that between January and March, the government, FAC distributed 1.9 trillion, out of which the federal government got 803 billion. Okay, and then the total service, we have total debt service in terms of amount, naira amount, was about 610 billion. So 610 billion debt service January to March. You place that side by side with the revenue end. So that gives you over 70%. So where you're spending over 70% servicing debt, that is indeed a challenge. But as I said earlier...
Professor Uche, we'll pause you in the meantime. There are a number of points that you've already gravitated towards. We'll come to those points presently. But let's bring in now Niyi Akinseju. Niyi, what's your reading of Nigeria's current debt profile?
I don't think we should look at the debt profile in isolation of our reality. Our reality is that we have a huge infrastructure deficit. The AFDP placed it at $3 trillion. The DMO at the point in time placed it at $500 billion. And of course, some other experts had said that we would need to spend a minimum $30 billion every year to bridge, for the next 10 years, to bridge our infrastructural deficits. And again, what is the essence of infrastructure? It simply underscores the fact that if you lack appropriate infrastructure, your economy will not develop sustainably. And of course, you also suffer from competitiveness, which means your products and services will not compete effectively, with other jurisdictions. As it were, we need a minimum of $100 billion injected into infrastructure to take us to a standard, we're not near standard level, to be able to trigger appropriate momentum in economic development, of the country. That is our reality. Do we have any other options, to invest this amount? I have reviewed it, and of course, a number of people will say the option will be the PPP, public-private partnership. Some would say corporate financing, and I will ask, how do you expect companies to come into play when they don't even know the direction, of the economy. So I am thinking, and I think most Nigerians appreciate the fact of what money borrowed is used for. And I think we've lost some opportunities in the past. In our recent past, if we calculate amount income earned, by the government, close to $1 trillion, but we didn't do anything with it. In truth, we paid down our public external debt in 2006, $30 billion. By 2015, we had generated another 12 trillion naira. So you then want to ask, what did we do with what we earned and the money we borrowed? So much that we could count up to 12 trillion naira in 2015. What did we do with it? So the essential thing to my mind is when you borrow, the important thing is to deploy it for appropriate developmental activities. So going forward, I am not perturbed with the level of our borrowings now, because our reality is either of two. Either we remain where we are and we continue to live piecemeal, as it were, or we take a revolutionary action, be more committed, transparent, borrow money, and deploy it as appropriate, to infrastructure so that we can trigger faster economic development momentum. I want to propose seriously that we should have a 5-year borrowing rolling plan so that we know how many projects we want to fund over a period of 5 years and be able to also say that in another 10 years we'll be able to pay back, because infrastructural projects and utilities, have a way of also paying back. And if you don't do them, one, the quality of life, human capital development is reduced. The mystery index will continue to reduce. There's no way we can move out of our mystery index, as it were, inflation plus unemployment, as it were, with what we are doing now. It's still piecemeal.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Nee. I just wonder, before we go over to our Cardinal Network Center, you've extolled the fact that borrowing is good, and we need to continue to do that in order to boost our infrastructural base, which would then catalyze economic activities, growth, and development. Is there a disaggregation of the quantum of our debt to see, well, okay, federal government is borrowing to do this, states are borrowing to do this, because there are also reports as to the heavy debt burden of the states? Yeah.
Relative to the federal government, is low. At 24.9, I think the state is ascribed about 4-point-something trillion naira. So when you do a relative analysis, when you take the whole 36 states plus the FCT, is not much, But of course, we know the federal system. We have a large federating system that is also responsible to provide for so much infrastructure across board. So it's expected. But what's the important thing is, whoever is questioning our debt profile, as it were, must also look back to what we have been doing with our money before 2015. Now, I can sufficiently say I am encouraged, because I can see the Niger Bridge coming up for the first time out of the waters. I saw it this morning and I was elated, I see the Lagos-Ibadan Express Road, nearing completion. I visited the last point of the Lagos-Ibadan rail lines, nearing the main city of Ibadan. Now, for me, these are exciting prospects. Can we move further than this? Because the truth of the matter is, for instance, how did we even recorded up to 6-7% of growth without effective railway system in the first instance? How did we recorded 5-6% of growth without inland waterways transportation? And you just wonder that we have been living a boom, as it were. we are now appropriately described in our downside. And the only way we can move ourselves out of this downside, as far as I'm concerned, in the immediate is borrowing. The option of PPP, we have the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, somewhere very near here. And I've been following their activities. And of course, I understand their limitations. The truth of the fact is that the Nigerian concession environment lacks the basic nuances of privatization. And that is why we have problems even with our discourse that was privatized from the unbundled PHCN. You know, some of the companies privatized during the early days, you know, during the Obasanjo period. Some of them are under receivership of AMCON now. You know, what it tells us is that we still need to upgrade, you know, our capacity in terms of negotiating PPPs.
All right, thank you very much, Nia Kinsiju. Let's now go to our Lagos Network Center, where we have Chinedu Anozia, who's also a financial consultant. Chinedu, let's get your take on our current debt profile and how serviceable it is.
Well, on our current debt profile, it's rising. It's over 60% of government revenues, but we've not reached the peak yet. But it's advisable for the government to seek ways to curtail its debt. It's also important that the government refinances its debt with concessionary loans at lower interest rates from multilateral and bilateral agencies. That would reduce our debt service costs at the moment. And secondly, there's also a need for the government to curtail its recurrent expenditure. Once we have savings in recurrent expenditure, government will be able to deploy the saved funds into its capital expenditure. And then we'll have enough funds for infrastructure development.
All right, thank you. Dr. Mohammed Sani Bello in our Cardinal Network Center, you listen to the other guests. What's your take on Nigeria's current debt profile, and in your opinion, what challenges are arising therefrom?
Thank you very much. I think the matter is settled. We have huge infrastructure gap, and then we need financing to address it. Our current sources of funding from the budgets and from other ways of generating revenue cannot do it. So what we must do, definitely, is to borrow. For me, it is not really important talking about our debt profile, provided we are talking about infrastructure development, because we need infrastructure development to address the issue of economic growth, to address the issue of employment, to address the issue of poverty reduction, and many other things that we require as a nation. Therefore, what we need to focus attention to is how do we manage the debt which we borrow towards infrastructure development. Number one, we need to do good planning. We don't just borrow and we say we have deficit in electricity, deficit in roads and other facilities. We have to do good planning. I like one of the contributors has mentioned it. Secondly, we have to demonstrate strong political will, because in dealing with debts and in developing infrastructure, there are so many challenges which will require strong political will to deal with. Thirdly, we need to consult. There are so many stakeholders in this. It's not just the government, it's not just the private sector, but the communities themselves. We need to sensitize people on the need to have infrastructure and how to manage those infrastructure when they are in place. Let me give you a quick example. You would construct a road where it is expected the road will last, say, 10 years if you have not more than 30 tons of stock flying on those roads. Then you now have a situation where vehicles carrying 45 tons, metric tons, 60 metric tons flying this road, and definitely the roads get bad sooner, very soon after they are constructed. There is no any measure taken to ensure that, those roads, those people who are using heavy trucks on the road, either they pay for it or they are penalized in some other ways. Then, apart from consultation, you also need to make sure that you do away with corruption in the way we manage our debts. You don't borrow money to finance infrastructure development and then it is diverted into something else. Or you inflate the price of the items that will be required to provide the facilities. Then finally, which is also very important, we have to make sure that we do away with nepotism. Because for me, some of the reasons why we are not making use of debts optimally is because we don't get the real people who have the capacity, who really are experienced in handling those monies for infrastructure development. So if we put all this together, I am for debt borrowing. I'm not scared about the amount of debt that we already have. I'm not scared about it, provided the debt is going to be tailored towards provision of critical infrastructure because we need it. So this is my take on this for now.
All right, thank you very, very much. That's Dr. Muhammad Sani Bailey from our Kaduna Network Center. Now, let's get back to Professor Waleke. There's been no doubt that there has been a significant increase in terms of financing of capital projects under the Buhari administration, and we have seen that it has come with ripple economic effects. But then I know that Prof here was, Dr. was actually saying, Nia Kinsiju here was actually mentioning some of them. That is the second Niger bridge. We're beginning to see, the railway, we're beginning to see Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. What are the other factors? What are the other infrastructural factors that contribute to our huge, domestic and external debts?
Yes, let me perhaps, emphasize this, that if you look at the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, it talks about, Nigeria spending a minimum of $100 billion every year for the next 30 years if we must achieve world-class infrastructure. The UNDP even has maybe a more conservative estimate. UNDP estimates that we need to bridge the infrastructure deficit, which is everywhere. In the housing sector, for example, they bandy about 17 million housing units. In the rail sector, for example, a country of 200 million, the rail tracks we have is just about 3,500 kilometers of rail tracks. Compare that to South Africa, where you have over 31,000 kilometers of rail track. So to bridge this infrastructure gap, UNDP estimates that we need to spend $20 billion every year, for the next 10 years in order to bridge it. And how much do we budget on an annual basis over time? We've been doing about $26 billion. That's our total budget, $26 billion. So for us to be able to do that, we need to, and we can't afford to commit the entire budget every year just on infrastructure. There are other demands. So the point I'm making, I want to also, re-emphasize is that it does appear that borrowing appears to be the only way. Because even if you talk about PPP, PPP means public-private partnership. The government also has a part to play. The National Infrastructure Integrated Master Plan says the government should provide 52%, while the private sector does, 48%. If you take the Abuja-Kaduna rail line, for example, it's a good case of PPP. That project was said to have cost about $850 million with China. The China Civil and Construction Company, China Exim Bank, providing $500 million. So even when you're doing PPP, you also have to provide your own counterpart fund. And when you don't have money, when you don't have money at all, where would the counterpart fund come in? So it's important we realize this. But I was making a point. I ended by saying that whether the borrowing we have done, has been optimal. Optimal in the sense that I agree with the debt management strategy of trying to rebalance the debt stock more in favor of external loans. Because as we speak, domestic debt is about 68%, external loans 32%. It used to be worse. Domestic debt was about 15%. Now the ratio is tilting more towards external loans. I agree with that, particularly because external loans appear cheaper. Okay, even though there are vulnerabilities, exchange rate risk, repricing risk, and so on. But what I have to recommend here is that even in turning to external loans, we should be careful with the source of the external loans. In recent times, we have shifted more to
I want us to
commercial credit.
Deal with it gradually, because we're going to come to that. That's a source of concern to a lot of people,
Yes.
the sources from which we get these loans.
Yes.
We will speak to that, but then I'm saying that aside, we're seeing a lot going on in terms of this administration doing so much in terms of infrastructure. We're seeing the rail, we're seeing the roads, we're seeing the second Niger bridge. Aside that, what other factors, account for this borrowing, either domestically or externally?
Power, for example.
Okay.
Electricity. The Mambila power plant. Okay, it's a huge project. This is not a project that the government can do alone. Of course, it's relying on external help, on loans, okay, particularly from the Exim Bank of China. So if you notice, we have borrowed from the Exim Bank of China to do many of these projects. We've also borrowed from Exim Bank of India, okay, including French Development Agency and Japan International Cooperation Development, the KfW of Germany. These are our bilateral sources. You said we'll talk about sources, but it's good I also mention it, that bilateral sources come at rates between 3 to 5%, which, in my view, should be explored. If you look at the Korean example, for instance, that is one book I usually recommend to any development economist, The Korean Miracle, as well as The China Strategy by Edward Se. If you look at these two books, they're very good literature on how you can deploy that, in finance and infrastructure. In the case of Korea, for example, in the 60s, what did Korea do? Korea borrowed money from, including USAID, to build factories. So it's important we also consider the type of projects we are financing. It's one thing to say borrow to finance projects, but what type of projects? If the projects are such that won't be able to pay back, then it doesn't make sense to borrow to do those projects. If you can borrow and do road, and then you are going to toll those roads, the private sector can come in and partner and do the roads with you. But where you borrow and put in projects that can't pay back, that is where the problem is. Korea borrowed to build cement factories, fertilizer plants in Korea. And don't forget, these are revenue-generating establishments.
Yeah, but those are not infrastructure.
Sure. No,
are you with me? Those are not infrastructure. But
yes,
Niya Kinsiju argues that infrastructure, that is sub. You must have that sub, otherwise you can't build on top.
You are correct. That is why I said you tie the source to what you want to do. If you want to borrow for a road, if you want to borrow for a rail that will take you years to complete, you go to the World Bank. You go to the African Development Bank, multilateral sources that will give you 30, 40 years with sufficient moratorium. But if you want to borrow for short-term projects, such as these factories, you can then do commercial. You can go and do Eurobond, 10-year Eurobond. To me, it doesn't make sense to issue a 5-year Eurobond to do a long-term project. That is funding mismatch. In 2013, we issued 1 billion Eurobonds in 2013 in 2 tranches. 500 million 5-year Eurobond that matured in 2018. What did we do, with the money? So you can't use a 5-year loan from a commercial source, Eurobond, to say you're doing long-term projects. It doesn't work that way.
All right. Professor Waloke, thanks. Again, we'll return to you because of Niya, of course, is raring to respond to some of the points that you have raised. I just want to throw this in addition to whatever raft of responses that you might have. On this program, and indeed other experts have said, look, you have a lot of money outside of the economy. And these are potential investors who want to put the money in on your infrastructure, put the money in on projects or programs, of course, once they are sure of their rate of return. But that the environment must be conducive for this money to come. I'm not talking about the hot money you find on the stock market. But there is also a persistent challenge. You're talking about the challenge, for instance, of PPP earlier. Is our legal system or our legal environment sufficiently aligned with our philosophy of infrastructural development and therefore borrowing or attraction of capital? Because you're talking about, for instance, we keep talking about rail and rail and rail. All we are hearing is government putting its money into rail, government putting its money into roads. And as you very well know, you have said on this program, look, and Waleke has just repeated that, even if government were to throw in all its annual budget, it can't be enough. So why haven't we moved on the other tracks simultaneously, getting the laws to be properly aligned, remove railways from the strictures of the legal system you have right now, create the ample environment for investors to see it as an attractive model, the roads as well. Why haven't we been able to get that right?
I think we should go along that. I buy into that, and that's my thinking. But again, I am a gradualist, when it comes to development economy. An economy that is prostrate needs first to be taken up, and then it can start running. The truth of the matter is the Nigerian economy is a prostrate economy. And of course, it suffers mainly from structural deficiency. And structural deficiency is actually embedded in this infrastructure we're talking about. Even where we create enabling environments, because of deficiency structure, investors will not likely come in. Pension funds, for instance, we are talking of up to 8 trillion naira in Nigeria's own pension fund, waiting to be invested in infrastructure. But again, the risk assessment, would counsel any pension fund manager that it may not be the right time. And what is the right time? Like a prof said, government must first do its own part. Most investors are comfortable with post-commissioned projects, either utility projects or manufacturing projects and all that. Most investors are likely to invest when they are sure of the project. So therefore, for instance, if you are building a road, if you are constructing a road, the average investor may be wary of investing in that road construction until he has seen you done your design, done some construction, and he can see where the project is going. And you have done like 70-80% of it. He is now more confident to invest in that construction, especially if you are now doing infrastructural bond for him. He can invest as an investor or invest as a direct participant. So what we have now is the need for government to continue to drive these efforts, especially our public utilities. While road construction may not bring in, for instance, immediate revenue, in terms of tolling, as a prof said. Well, again, if you have 1,000 well-laid, well-connected, and I say well-connected because roads are supposed to be economic highways, and they must link up to economic activities, and you have all those in place, it means that in another 2-3 years, your earnings from income, either from companies' income and other sort of levies, would increase, and therefore increase also public earning capacity, revenue capacity. So these are some of the important things we need to look at, in infrastructure. If we have proper ports and harbors in place, it's also likely that our earning capacity would increase.
But where would the money come from?
Yeah, so. Yes. Now the money now you have 3 options. Of course, the PPP we have talked about. PPP is not you cannot use the epidemic approach for PPPs. You just don't inject it. We've had the issue with General Electric that has shown interest, serious commitment. I'd gone to a conference with them before where they were ready to place their balance sheet, to raise money, to rehabilitate our narrow gauge, 3,500. They have even signed. But again, as you noted, we also have those kind of constrictions, legal constrictions, environment not yet properly enabled, but we cannot wait until the environment are enabled. Part of enabling that environment is to create other activities ongoing. If we have Lagos, Ibadan, London, and if we are lucky, we are able to secure another $10 billion and get Lagos, Kano ongoing, economic activities would increase in that axis. And of course, along that axis, you now have different projects coming up by themselves, and PPP, by their own volition, by their own volition, coming to lock in into opportunities created by that primary economic activities, engineered by these projects' funding, as it were.
All right, thank you very much, Nia Kinsiju. We'll come back to you. Let's go over now to our Lagos Network Center, where we have Chinedu Anozia. Chinedu, well, you've listened to Prof here and Nia Kinsiju. I'm sure you want to speak to some of the issues that they have also raised. But then, as you do that, I'd like you to also speak to the issue of the source. Should we be at ease with our multilateral sources or our bilateral sources of income? Is it something we should be at ease with? There are lots of complaints about getting loans from China. Is it something that we should be at ease with?
Yes, it's also advisable for us to partner with multilateral agencies and countries such as China in obtaining loans for infrastructure development. But the issue here for Nigeria is the structure. Our PPP arrangement lacks the legal backing that creates the credibility for any private investor to invest with the government. So the government needs to look into its PPP arrangement. It needs to restructure that. And there's another model that the government can also utilize called the regulated asset-based model. That model also can be utilized by the government because it ensures and also guarantees the investor the rate of return on their investment. And again, it's also backed by the legislation, which also ensures that the investor recoups his sunk investments in infrastructure. And the multilateral agencies also are more favorable to infrastructure financing that has a regulator. So that ensures that both the investor and the multilateral agency are adequately protected in that infrastructure investment.
Okay, thank you very much, Chinedu. Let's return to Dr. Sani Bello in our Cardinal Network Center. Sani Bello, I would like you first to respond again to the point articulated a while ago by Nia Kinsiju. Nia believes that, look, you need this level of government borrowing and expenditure on infrastructure in order to enable the economy get a foothold, and then you'll be in a position to attract other investors and then other activities. Professor Waleke warns that, look, this must be projects that can repay themselves. Now, that's one point I would like you to respond to. The second point also has to do, which is allied to this, how do we obtain the master key that would enable us unlock the huge funds that are floating around with fund managers outside of the economy to come in here and then assist with our infrastructural upgrade?
Thank you very much. I think I will start with the last question which you raised. You know, in my earlier submission, I talked about strong political will. The government must demonstrate strong political will to, show to the public and, of course, the international potential investors that it is ready to play according to the rules. This is what is going to attract all such, fundings around to come into Nigeria for infrastructure development. So strong political will is very important, and we must be very transparent. We must, do away with corruption. We must do away with nepotism. We must consult widely so that communities that are going to be affected by the infrastructure deployment will understand, will cooperate, during the process. We also must ensure that it is anchored on very good planning. Now, regarding the sources of funding for infrastructure development, I have listened to, our eminent contributors. One aspect that we probably need to explore is the issue of build, operate, and transfer. We can invite, once the environment, the legal framework is correct, I believe there are investors who will be willing to come and say that they want to construct, a road from city A to city B, and then they will have a toll arrangement where they can recoup their investment, and then after they recoup their investment, that infrastructure revert to the government, for maintenance and for public use. So this is one other area we can explore. But as I said, everything must begin with demonstration of strong political will, which is really very important, and then we must be able to show that we are transparent, no corruption, and we must recruit, engage those who are really capable, who have the capacity to run the process. Not just people that we bring because we know them or because we like them or because we associate with them one way or the other. So these are the kind of things that we require to have in place, and then you will see investment flowing from every, nook and crannies of the world. But let me also mention this. When you are talking about this borrowing, whether it is huge or whether we are exceeding a certain limit, any person or any investor, when they want to when they want to invest, they have to do what we call due diligence. So you cannot borrow beyond your perceived or actual capacity to pay. No investor, no person will be willing to give you money unless, based on the assessment of that institution, you have the capacity to pay. So, while you can go approach multilateral organizations, you can approach countries, you want to do PPP, one thing that is clear is anybody who is going to invest will ensure that you have the capacity to repay. It's not you that will determine whether you want to borrow X amount. No, you may wish to borrow X amount, but that will not be available to you. If the investor perceives that you do not have the capacity or the potential to repay or to really work according to the terms of agreement, that money will not be available to you. So, while we can say we want to limit the amount or we want to increase the borrowing to whatever amount, we should know that the counterparty over there, they have to do due diligence. So it's not just what you ask for that you get. So this is one of my submission on this matter at the moment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bello, for your submission. Now, Professor Waleke, you are a professor of the capital market. Is there a window in the capital market that one can use for borrowing for infrastructure development? Is there any window like that in the capital market?
Yeah, certainly. And the government...
is the government...
has even started... yes, taking advantage...
taking
advantage of... those kinds of windows. It's just that I would want to see more of such. In recent times, the government has issued the Sukuk bond. Yeah, Sukuk bond. The Sukuk bond is more like an infrastructure bond. Okay. And the good thing is that each time the proceeds come, 100 billion Sukuk bond, the proceeds are handed over to the Minister of Works and Housing. They're usually used for infrastructure. The government too has in recent times to issue the green bonds. So I would like to see more of infrastructure, bonds, as opposed to general obligation bonds. If you look at the composition of our debt stock, the bulk of it is bonds. That's the general obligation bonds. In terms of the instruments, the sukuk is is still small. So I want to see more of infrastructure bonds. Elsewhere, you hear of railway bonds. When you raise such funds, it is going strictly for, is ring fenced, and it's going strictly for railways. So the opportunities are are very much there. As I said, our borrowing should tilt more towards that, and it's even stipulated in the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2017 that if we must borrow, that such borrowing must be for long-term projects. Okay, the same too applies to subnational governments. State governments. Unfortunately, many state governments, as opposed to coming to the capital market to borrow for infrastructure, they go to banks, and that is why you find, some of them in debt crisis today. If you look at the debt profile of states, okay, we could say yes, there's a correlation between the size of a state's economy and the debt, which explains why Lagos State, for example, has the highest of over 500 billion naira, followed by Rivers and Delta in that order. At the bottom of the ladder is Yobe with about 26 billion naira. But how do you explain the case of Osun State, for example, that has over 110 billion in debt? And that also implies that the allocation it gets, every month from FAC is usually one of the least because of the deductions that must be made before the money gets to them. So for such states, the ideal thing is, of course, there is need to do infrastructure. You approach the capital market for such infrastructure. So the capital markets provides opportunities for not just the federal government, but even for subnationals, to go to raise funds. I still have to talk about this issue of source and funding. And I gave an example with Korea, borrowing to build factories. Imagine if we could get some money, from commercial, capital markets, out there to build partner with Dangote, for example, the Ibetos, and then build a cement factory. If the cement price can crash from 2,000 naira back to 500 naira back, you can imagine the ripple effect to have on the housing sector. So when I talked about borrowing for factory, and you said it's infrastructure, you can see it's also tied to infrastructure. Okay, so we need to borrow to fund projects that are viable, that are also, and that is the type of projects that will, interest the private sector. And as I said earlier on, if we need to do a rail line, for example, okay, each time I think about this, what comes to my mind quickly is this Abuja Kefi, Kefi axis. Imagine putting a rail line, from Kefi to Abuja. The kind of economic effect it's going to have.
Professor Waleke,
yes.
I'm sorry,
yes.
Jocularly, don't tell us imagine. Why is it difficult to say, look, from Abuja to Kefi, and from there to Akwanga, and then to Lafia, which is the capital, let's have a rail line. Why is it difficult to conceive of it and then get a job going?
Yes, that's the point we're making. Yes. I am saying that place is viable. It's a bankable, has a compelling case.
Absolutely.
So a private investor, knowing the volume of traffic, that even when you do that, you're going to disperse the population, okay, you create new settlements. And, talking about this too, there is this model of funding infrastructure that is being now popularized by, Abraham Wankwo, Dr. Abraham Wankwo, the former DG of the, he calls it the land, the LCA, okay, the land capture value. Land capture value means do the rail, okay, with an investor. Okay, as soon as you do it, of course, you know that all the property values there will appreciate. So whatever gains that will arise from the appreciation will now be shared between the government and the investor. So that kind of model too, is something that we can also explore. So.
Yeah, well, Professor Walek, I still would like need to respond to this aspect. Because
the legal environment.
Where the legal environment is part of it. But just the whole, we know what should be done. And why we are not getting to do it, it's another challenge. Plus the metrics. It's talked about Sukuk bond. Yes, we have applied some of the roads where the Sukuk bonds, have been used. In this case, resurfacing or reconstruction. You see, they've been part of the Shagamu Expressway. It's that. But how do you capture the returns on that to pay back, the Sukuk bond? But Abuja Kefi, the same way you can talk of so many other routes, even along the Benin, Shagamu, or Onitsha, Owerri, Enugu, you can have realized, but why are those projects not up and running?
As you noted earlier, the law is still not strong on it. There was a time I had an engagement with the former chairman of the Senate Committee on Transport, and Senator Benga Shafa, and I understood he was trying to review the Nigerian rail law, to reform it. The status now, I don't know, but what's obvious is that it has not been sent to the president. I am expecting such. And so many of our business and project infrastructure related laws, even to electricity, to water and all that, are still stewing in 1950s, 1960s laws, that needs urgent, immediate reforms and upgrade. But as I always said, we cannot wait until those things happen. Things must happen for Nigerian citizens to feel that government is doing something. Government is the trigger, is the engineer of impactful livelihood on the citizens. And if investors would come put his money where there are no economic activities, there must be a precipitate economic activities for investors to lock in. It is just natural. And international investment has become so competitive now that even in Africa alone, you have about 20, 30 countries competing for money that should come to Nigeria. So the only way, we can see a direction, or rather a redirection of international fund, for instance, to Rwanda in recent time. It's principally because Rwanda is doing so much. In fact, yesterday or so, Africa 50, an exclusive club of AFDB, did their AGM in Rwanda. Now, and it was publicized. What that tells me is that some investor somewhere in the UK, in the Netherlands, would be exposed to this information and they'll start asking questions about Rwanda. Those are the things investors are looking for. Now,
investors are looking for those things, but at the same time, there must be the environment. We talked about the legal environment, which doesn't quite appear conducive. The country risk factor is also there. Plus the fact that, if government should do this, government should do that, fine. But how much can government really do? And there's a lot. Look, Abuja, let's say, we're talking about rail. Abuja, Lokoja to Okene to Auchi to Benin, from there to Asaba, from there to whatever. Well, these are all projects that are waiting, to be grabbed, by investors. But gentlemen, we're taking a short break now. When we return, of course, we'll take some of the comments that have come in by way of tweets, and then we'll continue with aspects of the conversation.
Won't kill you. Move now.
To the disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say I no go dey do am again, because change begins with me.
Cross the other side of the road.
I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge, because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. I be one carry me past where they go.
Make they stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go they stop for the right bus stop, because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, you're welcome back. And if you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria. And focus has been on financing options for infrastructural development. We still have Nia Kinsiju here in Abuja. We still have Professor Waleke still with us. We have our guests in Kaduna and Lagos who have been speaking extensively in depth to this issue. But just before we continue, we have comments, suggestions by way of tweets via Twitter handle at NTA GM. And so you can be a part of this conversation. All you have to do is tweet at us at our Twitter handle at NTA GMN. But first, let's take the tweets that we have. The very one, this very first one is from Active Citizen. He says, for one, am worried about all that we're spending for procurement for railway developments across the nation with imported steel, boats and all fittings in comparison to what we require to have Delta Ajaokuta steel rolling mills working again to provide raw materials for same.
Abangbola Humbab's tweets, even developed nations borrow. What is important here is to ensure that what the loan is meant for is judiciously executed. Let's have tax reform also, where tax evasion and avoidance by bigwigs are prevented. By the way, there's nothing wrong with tax avoidance. The offense is tax evasion.
And Law Alpha tweet, it says, I have always opined that borrowing for finance infrastructure development is not the way to go. Rather, government should generally increase taxation, particularly on luxurious goods.
Festus Akimboyewa, we can fund our infrastructure projects to a large extent via taxes and charges. Government should do more to expand our tax net and increase VAT on luxury goods and assets.
Sunny Michael Makuji tweet, says, I won't subscribe to the idea of borrowing or overtaxing the poor masses to finance projects. Rather, I advocate for public-private initiative. Thereby, private bodies and government can finance projects and of course, they can be managed by the private sector.
All right, those are the tweets that we have in the meantime. I was just wondering, Rhoda, before we bring in our guests again, and I'm sure they will hear what we are saying. The first tweet from Martins with the Twitter handle Active Citizen was talking about the fact that what we are borrowing is enough to get Delta, Ajaokuta and others working. That also speaks to what Waleke was saying. Well, Ajaokuta is also mired in a lot of controversy, legal or otherwise. If you borrow to say, look, let Ajaokuta roll, it will be a different story. And I'm just thinking aloud now. Couldn't we have another steel complex other than Ajaokuta? Can it not be anywhere else other than Ajaokuta? If that one is already, if assuming, I don't want to use the word jinxed, but assuming it's difficult, we can't get another steel mill, in another location?
In finance, there is what is called abandonment approach. Yes. Abandonment, yes, you look at the cost of a project and consider whether it would be better off, abandoning the project and starting something completely new. Now, I wouldn't subscribe to gestation in, that project, but we can also have, smaller plants. We can do, smaller plants. Korea started with steel, before it, it could continue with its infrastructure plan. And talking about, I think one of them said, yes, we could use taxes and so on. Again, the Korea example, the road between Seoul and Busan was done, from IGR. The Korean government didn't borrow to do that. They started that project in 1968 and concluded it in 1970. All that the then President Park did was cut the budget of all the ministries, and then, using the proceeds, it was able to do the roads. So I agree that we can also cut down on spending, to be able to free up funds. The government too can also pursue the issue of privatization. Okay, we identify enterprises that we need to privatize, and we'll do so. NNPC, for example, nothing says the government cannot give up, some part of some interest in NNPC. By way of privatization.
Niye earlier talked about the challenges that we have faced, with regard to the privatization exercise I went on before.
He actually mentioned the unbundling of PHCN.
PHCN is one of them, and some of the debts that AMCON has today comes from some of those privatized entities. Is that the way to go?
Yes, it is. That something has gone wrong in the past doesn't mean we can't. It depends on the way it was done. What is clear today is that many of the companies that people that won those bids, we are not really competent, to handle those companies. So if we privatize them, if the government says, okay, let's give up 40% of our interest in NNPC, through the stock exchange, okay, you can expect that more investors will come into the sector. So I go for privatization, and I am also going for reduction in particularly recurrent spending to be able to free up funds to do projects.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nia Kinshiju. I'm thinking, what are our options of exploring taxation, foreign direct investment for infrastructural development? Are there any chances of exploring that?
Of course, for any development-minded economist or investor, the first point of attraction is FDI, foreign direct investment. Is the cheapest, the most convenient, and the least burden, on sovereign, But again, as Kingsley noted, we have institutional limitations. I am hoping that the Focus Lab that was started last year or sometimes ago would help, because our bureaucracy still remains fuddy, and to that extent, an investor wants to pick a paper and read the lines black and white, and he knows the conclusions, from what he has read. When you present an investor with so many scenarios that he cannot derive a conclusion, it tends, to be discouraged. And I think that is a major limitation to our FDIs, We need to attend to even the juristic process beyond the law, the juristic process itself, the judiciary process. As an investor, I have an issue with my counterpart in this jurisdiction. I want the judiciary to intervene, and it's taking 20 years. If I have that kind of history, it's not likely I want to invest in that kind of country. So we are supposed to start thinking of a fast process, alternative dispute resolution entity that attends to businesses and investments. Talking about tax, already Nigerian businesses are complaining of being overtaxed.
Double taxation.
If you are talking of 30%, and in truth, where you have companies generating all their utilities, the water, the electricity, and all that. Electricity content alone is about 40% of cost of production, And after they have done, and I must tell you, the Nigerian companies are creative. Because despite this environment, if you are able, at the end of the day, you invested 1 billion naira, and you are able at the end of the day to make 200, 300 million naira from that, and you are also paying so much of taxation from it, it discourages further investment, And in fact, so many investors that would have gone into the productive sector, the real sector, would rather go into the banking and investment sector, to do bonds and treasury bills and all that, than to go into real sector, because it's more convenient,
Okay, Neye, thank you very much. Let's return to Lagos, where Chinedu is. Stay with us. Chinedu, some of our viewers obviously will also wonder, when we're talking about alternative sources of financing infrastructural projects, from time to time we hear of the pension funds being a quantum of some trillions. Some of those figures appear to make no meaning. They're just sitting there and the roof is leaking over our heads. You also hear of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, is there something that is probably wrong with the bankability of the projects that is not attractive to either the pension funds operators, pension fund managers, or the sovereign wealth fund that will continue to reach out for borrowing.
There's a need for the government to create bankable projects. I would also have to talk about the PPP structure in Nigeria. Most of the investors, we've had some cases where investors have lost some of their funds while investing with the government in PPP structure. So it's also important for the government to review the structure of the PPP. The pension funds and banks would not want to commit their funds if there is no legal backing to guarantee their return on investments and also their return on the investors' funds. So it's also important for the government, both the federal government and state government, to look into review their models. As I said, there's also a new model where there's a regulated asset-based model in which there will be an independent regulator that will determine the allowed revenues and prices that would now guarantee revenues and cash flow to the company that would invest in the infrastructure. Then that means the investor would also get earn an acceptable return on investment. But the government needs to put that in place before the pension funds, come in. There's no legal backing to protect the pension funds and banks of their investments into infrastructure in Nigeria. Recall that we had issues with the Lagos-Ibadan road. We had issues with the toll road in Lekki. That has also scared the foreign banks and international financiers. So it's also important for us to get that right. But the investors love Nigeria because there's so much opportunities here, especially in our power sector. There's so much opportunity in the power sector. There's so much opportunity in the water sector, and of course the transportation in terms of rail infrastructure. But we don't have the right legal framework to attract these investors. We hope that the government would review the regulatory and the legal framework, surrounding this infrastructure. You also mentioned of the Kefi Railway. Yes, there are investors who will be willing to invest in the rail. But as I said, the law concerning the rail and the NRC has to be reviewed. So those are the issues that the investors are waiting upon the government, because the funds are available for Nigeria, but we are not able to access that amount of funds. But rather, other countries like Egypt, South Africa are attracting more, foreign direct investment into their infrastructure, because they have now, reviewed, their laws, which now give the investors, a legal backed, guarantee of their investment. So we need to do that. And secondly, the government should not be the sole investor into that infrastructure. It's also better for the government to partner with, a private company to own and operate that infrastructure, because the private sector is more efficient. The private sector bringing its technical expertise and its, finance to manage that infrastructure, for the long term. So it's also very important for the government to look into these areas where we are lacking as a country.
All right. Thank you very much, Chinedu Anos here. Dr. Mohamed Sani Bello, in your opinion, how might the pension funds and sovereign wealth funds be incentivized to more readily invest in infrastructure? We keep hearing of promises and all kinds of figures. We've had some of the CEOs on this program, and they just tell you what they are going to do here and there, and then the next thing you hear, government has gone out again to borrow. And the money we have in our kitty, nobody knows.
I think when it comes to the issue of making the pension funds and, of course, even the deposits of banks, those that are for long-term nature, available for infrastructure development, we have to look at, ways of encouraging banks to really not be thinking so much about how much they are going to make or report in terms of profit at the end of the financial year. They should also see themselves as, wanting to contribute towards the development of the real sector of the economy. What we have witnessed so far is a situation where banks will be reporting huge profits at the end of the financial year, but, without any significant investment in the real sector of the economy. So the distortion in the economy has allowed them to be able to make a lot of money without, impacting on the real sector. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria, of course, the federal government, and other stakeholders should come together to agree on what should be, the ratio between investment in the real sector and investment in the other sectors of the economy for banks, for pension managers, and all those funds that are available locally, which can be put towards infrastructure development. And more so, it is easier to deal with the regulatory framework, the legal issue aspect of the whole arrangement when you are dealing with local institutions than when you are dealing with foreign institutions, because foreign institutions will demand much more and than the local institution. For monies channeled towards infrastructure development by banks, pension managers, those kind of monies are usually guaranteed in terms of payback or in terms of insurance by the NDIC. So it means even as we have it now, without looking at the regulatory or the laws on some of these issues, it is possible to persuade the banks and the pension managers to be looking at the real sector, and particularly issue relating to infrastructure with the funds that are available with them. Now, the other issue I would want to still speak on, which is...
all right, Dr. Mohammed Sani Bello, Senior Lecturer at Kaduna State University, we would like to thank you for being part of our conversation this morning. You joined us from our Kaduna Network Center. And also from Lagos, we were joined by financial consultant Chinedu Anozia. Thanks a lot for being around on Good Morning Nigeria. And here with us in the studios, two familiar guests on the program, Niyi Akinsiju, an investment analyst. Thanks a lot for being around. And also Professor Uche Waleke, Professor of Capital Markets at Nasarawa State University in Kefi. Thank you very much. The only aspect, of course, we really have enough
closing
time.
Thoughts.
Yes, still enough time to get into. At some point, we'll return to that. You say our debt profile is not worrisome. But we had a history of indebtedness in this country, carried over from the Second Republic, that lingered on until about 2006, and there were consequences. So how did we manage that? How did we get out of it? All right, so that does it for our conversation segment. Let's go over now to our sports desk.